All right. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to another Conspiracy Theory Thursdays at Cool Beans Hot Stuff. Every day on this channel, we go over some new and interesting, every Thursday on this channel, we go over some new and interesting conspiracy theory. Today, we're not going to go over a conspiracy theory per se. We're going to do something a little bit different. Let's see, though. Let me do a quick recap of where we're at. I think because I've only been running this channel for a few weeks, for those of you who are new here, either on the live stream or checking me over out on YouTube. If this is your first time over here, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the stream, and maybe give the video a like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. But let's see. So this is only my fourth week doing this. I think it's only actually my third Conspiracy Theory Thursday, because last Thursday I last Thursday I did a Film Buff Fridays instead. On every Friday, I do something about film theory, a film review, something to that effect. We basically talk about movies on Fridays. But last Thursday, I really wanted to get to that Friday, and I left on a plane to go to Oklahoma on Friday to go hang out with my parents for Easter, which, by the way, to anybody watching, I hope you had a very happy Easter and did something fun with your family or somebody you loved. And if nobody loves you, then I hope you at least got to smoke some weed and chill. But yeah, so last Thursday, we didn't do a conspiracy theory. So we only got two of these guys under my belt. And let's see, what were they? The first one was, I'm going to have to look at my handy dandy note cards over here. I know we did one on the Large Hadron Collider, which was a little bit of a mess, not gonna lie. There was so much info there that I wasn't prepared for. It blew my mind how many conspiracy theories surround that guy and how difficult it is to find information on it. Oh, and then the dead internet theory, right? We did that one first, and that one was a pretty good stream. Yeah, that's definitely a issue that I've ran into with the Conspiracy Theory Thursdays. Some of these things are difficult to find information on, man, not gonna lie. I talked to my little brother over the weekend, who was also there for Easter. He's a bit of a conspiracy theory nut, which makes him the perfect source to go to for really good information regarding conspiracy theories. He has a lot of that, so he gave me some really good pointers, and hopefully I can improve on my Conspiracy Theory Thursdays. Today, though, I had something set aside that was a little bit different than what we've been doing, so we're going to go with that instead. And instead of just focusing on one conspiracy theory today, we are going to focus on not every, because I can't do every, because there's a lot of them, but a list of conspiracy theories that ended up being true. That's what we're going to talk about, right? And so I pulled out some of my favorites. Favorites is a loose word here. We're playing it loose with that. I would say, like, some of the most interesting, some of the more unbelievable ones that ended up being true, some of the most important ones that ended up being true, right? Because some of these conspiracy theories were such a kick in the ass that it completely changed how a lot of us think about the world around us, right? Some that are kind of funny and lighthearted, and some that are just kind of sad, to be honest. I think hopefully I end this on a happy note, because we got a couple in there that are really sad conspiracy theories that ended up being true. But we're going to go ahead and dive right in. The first one we're going to talk about is a commonly known one. If any of you watch the Joe Rogan podcast, that guy has talked about this particular conspiracy theory nonstop, and that is MK Ultra. So that's the first one we're going to dive into after I check my latency mon here in a split second. I'm still working on latency on my new Windows computer. Brand spanking new. You want to talk about a fucking conspiracy, son? I just bought this computer. Had it all custom built, put together, because I've never built a PC. I don't want to sit and waste the time building a PC and doing all the shit. I just needed to get a PC together so I could put a stream together and, have a computer to do other things on. Needed it quick, so I got it built with pretty high specs. This is a pretty nice computer. One of these days, maybe I'll show it on stream. And it's got clicks and pops in the audio. For those of you who may be returning to the channel, I don't know if I have any return viewers as of yet. But if I do, I'm sure then you definitely noticed it. I get little like cracks, like crackles, like happens occasionally. Sounds like a buffer size issue. It's not a buffer size issue. I've worked in recording studios 9 years. I know what a buffer size issue sounds like. This is definitely some kind of driver issue. And I talked to my very knowledgeable friends about it, and he gave me this latency mon. See, I can pull that down to the other screen so you guys can see it. This latency mon software. This thing is the real deal, man. Yet it gives you where these issues are coming from and specifically what drivers you need to look at. And these fucking this WDF 01000 kernel mode driver framework runtime is a real kick in the pants. Not as bad as it was. I've been working on it for the last 2 days straight. And then this NVIDIA Windows kernel mod driver has also been kicking my balls in pretty good. But so I'm running the stream while I'm running this latency mod so I can get a better idea of where what drivers are fucking up and causing my little pops. I did clean it up a little bit though. Those numbers were way higher yesterday when I was streaming. So hopefully today we only get a few pops here or there, maybe no pops, maybe the pops are gone. But so I will be monitoring that throughout the stream. So if I stop randomly in the middle of a sentence and stare at my stream and don't say anything, that's probably what I'm staring at. But anyway, so let's get back to the business at hand. MK Ultra, right? So most of you have probably heard of MK Ultra. A lot of you probably don't know exactly what MK Ultra was about, though. I've heard about MK Ultra since I was in high school. It was one of those things where, like, when you're in high school and you first hear about it, you realize that the government's pretty fucked up. But I never really knew what it was about. So it was interesting. Ooh, I barely caught that burp. You guys almost got an earful of pizza right there. I caught it, though. Anyways, never really knew what MK Ultra was entirely about, so it was interesting to read about it. And so I'm going to share some of the things that I found with you, not everything, because MK Ultra is pretty extensive. We can do an entire live stream just on MK Ultra because there's still a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding it that aren't completely, confirmed 100% yet. They're still conspiracy theories. But the main conspiracy theory was that the government was attempting to use mind control, or was experimenting on citizens using mind control. And that ended up being true. So let's read about it. So this is by Brian Dunning, The Secrets of MK Ultra. It's one of the most ominous terms in the history of modern governments and intelligence, nearly on par with the names of Josef Mengele and Pol Pot. For 20 years, from 1953 to 1973, the American Central Intelligence Agency funded and conducted tests on human subjects, both with and without their knowledge, in an effort to control minds and personalities for the purpose of espionage. Give me a second. Clear the old windpipe. Most notorious for administering the psychedelic drug LSD to people without their knowledge or consent. Yeah, MK Ultra has since become a cornerstone of conspiracy theorists, flaunting it almost gleefully as proof of the government's misdeeds against its own private citizens. And the scary part is that it's completely true. Well, sorry to spoil that for you, but yeah. The short version of the MK Ultra story is that the CIA spent a long time trying to control minds. After performing all kinds of dastardly and unethical testing, they found they couldn't reliably achieve their goals and terminated the program. That's it. That's the short and skivvy of it. It's important to keep in context both what it was and what it wasn't. It's evidence that the government tried something that didn't work. It's also evidence that the government has been proven willing to bend the rules, and by bending the rules, I mean breaking laws and violating both civil rights and ethics at every level. We're going to rediscover that point a lot during this stream. I don't think it's would be surprising to most people who end up watching this that it ends up being the government. Like 99% of the time, out of 99% of the true conspiracy theories, we got the government, and then 1% of the time we have Scientologists on this list. We hopefully will have some time to get into that one because that one's kind of entertaining. But yeah, this is going to be our first instance we cover today where we will realize just how grimy the government can get. Yeah, so anyways, but with that said, MK Ultra does not constitute evidence that similar projects continue today. Maybe they do, But logically, MK Ultra is not that proof, or not proof of that. Yeah. So, I mean, that is a good point to make, right? That is true. That just because this happened at one point doesn't mean it's happening now. I will say that this isn't, like I said just a couple seconds ago, this isn't the only point at which this happened, though. That's important to note as well. So let's look at how this all came about and what exactly happened. The Cold War started basically as soon as the smoke cleared from World War II, and the Western Bloc and the Communist Bloc immediately became suspicious of one another. In 1949, the highest ranking Catholic archbishop in communist Hungary, Cardinal Josef Menzetti, was marched into court where he had been charged with treason for trying to undermine the communist government. Menzies, who was innocent, mechanically confessed in court to a long list of crimes, including stealing Hungary's crown jewels, planning to depose the government, start World War III, and then seize power himself. The CIA watched this, noted his strange behavior while making the confessions, and concluded that he must have been brainwashed. They saw American prisoners of war in North Korea make anti-American statements on camera. Clearly, some response was needed to what appeared to be communist brainwashing abilities. They contrived to develop mind control techniques. One such project was called MK Ultra. MK meant the project was run by CIA's technical services staff, and Ultra was a reference to the highest level of security. But although MK Ultra is the poster child, there are other similar projects. It has spawned from Project Artichoke, founded in 1951 to study hypnosis and morphine addiction. There was also MK Search, MK Often, Project Bluebird, a whole raft of other related programs. So we don't dive into any of those today, but those would be interesting things to go over in another stream. There's a whole piss ton of these MKs, Bluebirds, Artichokes, Bumblebees. I don't know if that's one, but all kinds of shit. We'll have to dive into all of them. But I do got a few on the list that are unrelated to MK Ultra, but are still pretty crazy. The U.S. military, separate from the CIA, also conducted its own research. Project Chatter, part of the U.S. Navy, ran from 1947 to 1953 when MK Ultra took over. At the time, both psychology and psychopharmacology were in their infancies. We didn't really know whether the CIA's goals were achievable or not, whether it was not possible to exert a finely tuned influence on people's minds. During the Cold War's golden era of espionage, this was a major national security question. The CIA had to know whether this was something they could do, because if it was something the KGB could do right back to them. While nuclear physicists on both sides were building bigger and bigger hydrogen bombs, psychologists and chemists were working to fight the Cold War on a much subtler front. The CIA is not a scientific research organization, and so it needed to contract out the vast majority of this work. The CIA set up front groups, such as the Society for the Investigation for Human Ecology. Sounds professional, right? Nope. Turns out they drug your ass with LSD, roofie you, to fund projects at universities and hospitals in such a way that nobody realized the CIA was involved. Some 86 such institutions are known to have received funding as part of MK Ultra. That's pretty crazy. The vast majority of researchers were unaware that their programs were funded by the CIA, which is even crazier, and accordingly did their work as they normally would according to ethical standards of the day. Some researched forms of hypnosis, some did trials on a variety of drugs intended to work as truth serums, some did various psychiatric or psychological studies trying to learn what made people tick and how that tick might be manipulable. In fact, just about every bizarre experiment you might have read about probably was tied to some degree by MK Ultra funded research. Granted, the ethical standards of the 1950s and 1960s were not what they are today, but still there was very little intentional harm done by nearly all MK Ultra funded programs. Nevertheless, the exceptions were exceptional indeed. Yeah, so I guess that kind of makes sense. They're saying, like, out of all these, hypnosis and this and that, and a lot of them didn't really hurt people. So that's probably why a lot of those names don't find their way into the common vernacular. The MK Search, MK Often, Chatter, Artichoke, these sort of things aren't terms that people have heard about. I have never heard of those. So that would be interesting to kind of read into them. But MK Ultra is a big one that did, in a lot of ways, have unfortunate effects on innocent civilians. And we go over a couple of those too before we move on to the next one. I'll run over some interesting stories and some interesting people connected to MK Ultra. That is kind of cool to hear about. So, research done at McGill University by Dr. Donald Cameron took patients who came in with minor psychiatric complaints and subjected them to outrageous treatments. Some were given electroshock therapy at many times the normal voltage. Oh, that's a fucking bummer. Some were given LSD. That's much less of a bummer. If I had to choose between the two, I would go with some good solid acid. Some were given other experimental or illegal drugs. Well, it depends on what drugs those were, right? If the CIA is dosing you with cocaine, I'm not going to be too upset about it. All under the license granted by MK Ultra. Many reports state that some patients left with lifelong disabilities. That's really sad. We got a even worse conspiracy theory later in the stream where we get a lot of patients that leave with lifelong disabilities. We'll go over that one. It's another pretty famous one. The Addiction Research Center at the Public Health Service Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky was also secretly on the CIA's payroll. Dr. Harris Isbell took patients who came in to seek treatment for drug addiction and gave them massive doses of acid, heroin, meth, and psychedelic mushrooms. That used to be like my typical Saturday when I was in my 20s. Okay, all right. In one experiment, he put 7 patients on acid for 77 days straight. Oh, wow. That's pretty crazy. Talk about frying. Okay, that one gets that's a little too much, right? That's unfortunate. That's a bummer, bro. You could fill a month of episodes giving such brief examples of the MK Ultra projects that are known. The main thing we know now is that they didn't work. Yeah, all of that for nothing, man, just to get a couple randos high. Nothing that came out of MK Ultra panned out as very useful from an espionage perspective. In short, the CIA was never able to achieve the type of mind control that it wanted, and so the program was eventually terminated. Other related programs from other agencies continued for some time with similar results. Because of the secrecy and ethical violations, the CIA destroyed all the documents, with the exception of a few that have turned up here and there over the years from misplaced archives. What remains has all been declassified and can now be freely downloaded. So, we're not going to go over any of those documents today. Again, if we do if we do a MK Ultra specific stream, that would be really awesome to go over some of the papers that they have declassified from MK Ultra. We're just kind of giving you a rough rundown of all these various conspiracy theories that we know for a fact are true, and more or less giving you an idea of how we know that they ended up being true, because that's important, right? Before you say something's true, it needs to be based in fact. So I'm trying to give you what the conspiracy theory was, which each one of these conspiracy theories, what the story was, what part of it ended up being true, if not all of it, and how they know it's true. That's what I mean. So with MK Ultra, how we know it's true is that they declassified a lot of the documents surrounding it, and most of what we're talking about here was in these documents, or it came from people who were noted in these documents who confessed to doing these things. So, and I think I dive a tiny bit into that too here in a minute. But anyway, from a purely scientific perspective, there's nothing there that isn't old hat to modern psychiatry and psychopharmacology. MK Ultra never learned anything that we don't know now. From an ethical perspective, documents of some cases exist and some don't. It's probable that we don't know the worst of the ethical violations, and possible that we never will. So, now, the article continues on to some of those conspiracy theories that are still tied to MK Ultra that they haven't proved. We're not going to dive into that, right? Today is all about what is true, and that's the part that is true. Government 100% secretly drugged people to see what would happen, to see if they could control their minds. They used a whole bunch of different kinds of drugs. The most infamous one that you'll hear about most often connected to MK Ultra is LSD or acid. There's a couple interesting people tied to all of this. One of my personal favorites, Whitey Bulger, actually has a little bit of something to do with this. And when we get done reading on this, I got a really funny story about Whitey Bulger. So, Whitey Bulger, a former organized crime boss, wrote of his experience as an inmate test subject in MK Ultra. 8 convicts in a panic and paranoid state, Bulger said of the 1957 test at the Atlanta Penitentiary where he was serving time. Total loss of appetite, hallucinating. The room would change shape. Hours of paranoia and feeling violent. We experienced, well, that's not anything different for this guy. We experienced horrible periods of living nightmares and even blood coming out of the walls. That's a bummer. Guys turning into skeletons in front of me. I saw a camera change into the head of a dog. I felt I was going insane. Yeah, you probably would. There's good old Whitey right there. Seems like a real nice fella, right? Bulger claimed he had been injected with acid. Lysergic acid diethylamide, or acid, had become one of the CIA's key interests for its brain warfare program, as the agency theorized it could be useful in interrogations. In the late 1940s, the CIA received reports that the Soviet Union had engaged in intensive efforts to produce LSD, and that the Soviets had attempted to purchase the world supply of the chemical. One CIA officer described the agency as literally terrified of the Soviets' acid program, largely because of the lack of knowledge about the drug in the United States. This was one material that we had never been able to locate that really had potential fantastic possibilities if used wrongly. With the advent of MK Ultra, the government's interest in LSD shifted from a defensive to an offensive orientation. Agency officials noted that LSD could be potentially useful in gaining control of bodies whether they were willing or not. The CIA envisioned applications that ranged from removing people from Europe in the case of a Soviet attack to enabling assassinations of enemy leaders. On November 18, 1953, a group of 10 scientists met at a cabin located deep in the forest of Maryland. After extended discussions, the participants agreed that to truly understand the value of a drug, an unwitting experiment would be most desirable. And that's where this feller seemed to come in. So that is a bummer. You know, I've done acid before and I've had some bad trips on it. The thing about acid is if you have a bad trip on it, it's hard to control, in my opinion. You know, if you do shrooms and you have a bad trip, it's much easier to remind yourself that you're just tripping and it's no big deal, and then just go find something else to do that makes you feel less freaked out. Acid is a little bit harder to control. I can't imagine being stuck in a fucking prison and doing acid around a bunch of violent ass motherfuckers like this dude over here with the intense widow's peak, Vegeta looking motherfucker here. But yeah, that would be a bummer. So I do have here, I'm going to go over to my rant screen because I can. Where is my, oh, there it is. Okay, so this is my rant screen. This is where I go when I decide that I want to tell a story. I have a funny story about Whitey Bulger. So Whitey Bulger, like you read, he was an Irish mob boss. The movie Black Mass, Johnny Depp plays him in the movie Black Mass. The character of Costello in The Departed, Jack Nicholson's character, is loosely based off of Whitey Bulger combined with another Irish gangster. But he was a hardcore Irish gangster, and I believe Boston is where he was at. And he ended up being getting put on the list of the FBI's most wanted. And I actually have a whole nother stream that I'm going to be doing about that here soon, the FBI's Most Wanted stream, which it'll be a pretty fun time. I think I'm doing that on a Terrifying Tuesdays. We're going to go over that. But anyways, Whitey Bulger was put on the list of the FBI's Most Wanted and was on there for, I think, 20 some years, a very long time, maybe even more than 20 years, but he was there for a while, right? And anyways, when I was a kid growing up, my last name is White. I don't, entirely want to put that out on the internet, but that's my last name. And I earned the unfortunate nickname as a kid of Whitey. That was short for Whitey Tidies, which was what the 8th grade math teacher called me. And so that became my name for the rest of middle school and high school, was Whitey Tidies, hyphenated to Whitey's if you didn't want to be such a prick. Anyway, so people called me Whitey. Same as they called this guy Whitey. When I was 15, I went to a juvenile detention facility. And while I was at the juvenile detention facility, we got to read the paper in the mornings. And one morning, the guard comes in with a paper, says something about some big, giant gangster got spotted across the street. This is in Casper, Wyoming. Okay, tiny little town. I think it's like, I don't know what it is nowadays, but at the time I think it was like 30,000 people, right? It was a very small town, but it's where the juvenile detention facility was. And anyway, yeah, it was in the paper. Somebody took a snapshot of Whitey Bulger sitting at the Village Inn right down the street from the juvenile detention facility. You could look out my cell window and see the Village Inn that apparently Whitey used to eat at every morning, right? So when we were kids, we thought, oh, wow, that's crazy. That's when I first learned who Whitey Bulger was. He was some big, tough gangster. And of course, when you're in juvie, everybody in there's trying to be a big, tough gangster, right? That's why you're here. That's like, your college, right, for big, tough wannabe gangsters. And so anyways, shoot forward several years of my life. This is 2011 or 12, maybe 2011. I think I want to say no, 2011. You can look it up. That this will be, where you can just type this into Google and it'll tell you. But in 2011, I worked in Santa Monica. I was in a recording studio. Out of juvie, being a good boy, working in recording studios. I was interning in a recording studio in Santa Monica, just off of the 3rd Street Promenade. Had my car parked on the 2nd Street parking garage, Promenade parking garage. And that's where I kept the car when I wasn't using it. You know, you live in LA, you don't use the car as, you know, you try to use it the least amount as possible, especially if you have it sitting in a parking garage. Those parking garages are expensive. And anyways, one day I go to work at the studio, and my studio owner's like, man, did you hear about that guy Whitey Bulger? And I said, well, I know who he is, like, but I don't know anything, about him or whatever. Like, what do you mean you heard about him? He said he got arrested across the street. And I said, oh, wow. He said, yeah, in the 2nd Street parking garage. I said, oh, wow. Like, I live off of 2nd Street. I live 2 streets down from the parking garage. That's where I parked my truck. And he said, yeah, dude, apparently he was walking to his car in the parking garage, and the cops surrounded him and arrested his ass, and that's where he got arrested. I was like, that is crazy. Like, so there was one point in my life where Whitey was in Wyoming, right across the street from me when I was sitting in juvie, and then when he finally got arrested, he got arrested right across the street from me where I was living in the parking garage where I parked my truck. So I thought that was humorous, and that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. It's just anytime somebody brings up Whitey Bulger, I'm going to tell that story because I get a real kick out of it. And we're out of the rants. Okay, so Whitey Bulger, supposedly a part of MK Ultra, according to him. We're going to read a little bit about Operation Midnight Climax, which is an aspect of MK Ultra, right? So this is kind of one of the more infamous aspects of MK Ultra. Like we read, MK Ultra did we bankroll a whole lot of various different studies, scientific studies, doing a whole bunch of different shit. The most famous ones were the ones with LSD, and Operation Midnight Climax is the most famous out of all of those ones. So we're going to read about that. The CIA's initial experiments with LSD were fairly simple, if shockingly unethical. The agency generally dosed single targets, finding volunteers when they could, sometimes slipping the drug into the drinks of fellow CIA employees. Can't fucking trust no one over there in the CIA. Wow. Whew. That was a big one, too. Over time, these LSD experiments grew increasingly elaborate. Perhaps the most notorious of these projects was Operation Midnight Climax. See, I'm not lying. It says it right there, most notorious. In 1955, on 225 Chestnut Street, San Francisco, the CIA was devoting substantial attention to decorating a bedroom. George White oversaw the interior renovations. Not much of a decorator, White had a storied career in the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. When the CIA moved into drug experiments, bringing White on board became a top priority. White hung up pictures of French can-can dancers and flowers. He draped lush red bedroom curtains over the windows. He framed a series of Toulouse-Lautrec posters with black silk mats. For a middle-aged drug bureaucrat, each item evoked sex and glamour. George White wasn't building a normal bedroom. He was building a trap. Dun dun dun. Look at this sneaky fuck right here. Yeah. He looks like a bit of a perv. White then hired a Berkeley engineering student to install bugging equipment and a two-way mirror. White sat behind the mirror, martini in hand. Oh, I never realized that. This guy's name is White, too. No relation to this weirdo, promise you. White sat behind the mirror, martini in hand, and waited for the action to begin. Prostitutes would lure unsuspecting Johns to the bedroom, where the men would be dosed with LSD and their actions observed by White from beyond the mirror. As payment for their services, the sex workers would receive small amounts of cash, as well as a guarantee from White that he'd intercede when the woman inevitably had run-ins with law enforcement in the future. Though the CIA piloted these safe houses as a stage for testing the effects of LSD, White's interest shifted at another element of his observations: the sex. Always the sex. Men only think of one thing. Men only want one thing. And it's, two things, LSD and sex. The San Francisco house became the center of what one writer called the CIA carnal operations, as officials began asking new questions about how to work with prostitutes, how they could be trained, and how they would handle state secrets. The agency also analyzed when in the course of a sexual encounter, information could be best extracted from a source, eventually concluding that it was immediately after sex. But perhaps unsurprisingly, much of White's actions were driven by pure voyeurism. I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. White later said. Where else could a blood-redded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All Highest? The CIA. Nowhere else. So this goes a little bit into how the CIA eventually came to an end. I guess it's not that long of a read. What time is it? We're going at 30 minutes into the stream. We might come back and read that at the end of the stream if I'm, need a little bit of extra time to fill. But for now, you can go ahead and read that on your own if you like. This excerpt. Oh, no, hold on. We still got a little bit more. Yeah, we need to move on from this. I'll give you a couple really good books you can read if you want to read into MK Ultra. I found kind of like what's considered the creme de la creme of these MK Ultra information stories, all the gathering of the information that they have and giving you a more complete story. Another really crazy and well-known, I would say infamous aspect of MK Ultra, and this part is a little bit more of a conspiracy theory, is its tie to Charles Manson. Yep. Come on. There we go. This guy, that feller, Charles Manson, right? We all know what he did. And the Manson murders may have something to do with CIA mind control experiments. This is a interview with the Jacobin, and Mr. Tom O'Neill. We'll get into Tom O'Neill here in a minute. But he wrote a book, I believe it was called Chaos. And it goes over Charles Manson and everything, how Charles Manson came to be, right? And then, of course, in there, he brings up MK Ultra. So that's the part of this interview that we're going to read a little bit about. This interview is more about his book and about Charles Manson in general, which may be an entertaining stream to do at a later date, a whole stream about Charles Manson. We already did one about Gilles de Reyes. I don't think you can find that one on my YouTube, though, because I never did post that onto YouTube because that was a pretty horrible stream. I didn't do nearly as much research into that as I did into this, so it ended up being pretty fucking janky. But, oh, Mom. Oh, wow. Give me 1 second. Okay. Anywho, so this is about Marilyn Manson. We're not going to or Marilyn Manson. Sorry, Charles Manson. Marilyn Manson would also be really good for Terrifying Tuesdays. But this is about Charles Manson. We're not going to read a whole much into all of this information, but we are going to go over this one really important part of the interview. So Jacobin Magazine asks, I am also curious about Dr. Jolly West. If you know anything about MK Ultra, this guy's name has certainly popped up, who was involved in MK Ultra, and that's why it is going to pop up. Can you tell us a little bit about where he enters this story? The story is the life of Charles Manson. And Tom O'Neill says, MK Ultra was first exposed to the public in 1976 by a whistleblower, a State Department guy, and then reported by the New York Times, which dropped the bombshell that there had been a secret program conducted by the CIA to learn how to control people's behavior using drugs, sensory deprivation, and hypnotism. The article named 8 or 9 scientists, psychiatrists, and drug researchers who had been contracted by the CIA to conduct experiments on people without their knowledge or informed consent. One of these was Dr. Louis Jolly West. West was a psychiatrist who came out of the Air Force. In the early 1950s, he had been based in Lackland Air Force Base, where he served as the head of the psychiatry division. After that, he started the psychiatry department at the University of Oklahoma, ran it until 1969, and then was recruited by UCLA to run the psychiatry department in their neuroscience center. West told the New York Times that they had asked him to be a part of the program, but he had refused and told them that it was not safe to use LSD on human beings. He went to his grave denying that he had ever been a part of MK Ultra or used LSD on humans. And yet, I discovered that he had been in the same place at the same time that Manson became who he was. That is, somebody who able to control people's behavior and get them to commit the murders of strangers on command. Nobody had ever been able to prove West's involvement in MK Ultra, though it had long been rumored. When I found out he died, I contacted UCLA and requested access to his papers. And over the course of a summer, I found the proverbial needle in a haystack: letters between him and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who ran MK Ultra, who in fact started MK Ultra in 1950. West was there from 1952 or 1953. He was the main researcher for the program. So he was a part of MK Ultra. I reviewed all this correspondence showing that his whole career had been based on lies. West had been secretly funded by the CIA for about 20 years to do these Nazi-style experiments on patients and other people. He opened a kind of safe house in Haight-Ashbury in 1967, around the same time that Manson emerged there, and maintained an office at the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, where he regularly recruited subjects for his research. And it was at the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic where Manson was directed to go for his weekly meetings with his parole officer, Roger Smith, the same PO we were talking about earlier, who declined to revoke Manson's parole despite his escalating criminality. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting aspect of Charles Manson. We could do a whole conspiracy theory stream just on Charles Manson, but that's an interesting aspect of Charles Manson's life. He had continuously committed tons of different crimes, starting with a lot of petty crimes and then heavily escalating into more serious crimes that people would be spending years in prison for. And in almost every... There's a little baby burp, but I still saved you from it. You're welcome. In almost every instance of him getting arrested, he was let out. In some cases, not ever charged. In some cases, a lot of cases, never even seeing the inside of a courtroom. So that's pretty crazy, right? Anyways, yeah, Roger Smith who declined to revoke Manson's parole, regardless of all the times he was continuously arrested, worked or met with Manson at this Hashbury Free Clinic, which was ran by Jolly West. Smith was actually doing amphetamine research through the free clinic at the same time he was supervising Manson's parole, or rather, not supervising it, instead letting him do whatever he wanted until he formed his group of sociopathic killers. The Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic was run by David Smith, no relation to Roger Smith, just Smiths and Whites all over the place. Despite his claims that he never accepted any government grants, I've seen the funding papers. He and Roger were both being funded by the government, which the CIA was using as cover for their research grants. West once called the place a laboratory disguised as a hippie crash pad. Another psychiatrist there, James Allen, told me, we all saw Charlie every day. According to him, there was no way Jolly didn't know who Manson was, given that Manson was going to the clinic 2 or 3 times a week with his girls to get treatment for STDs, pregnancies, things like that. Of course, it wasn't like Manson innocently wandered into the clinic. He had to go there once a week for parole meetings. So Jacobin asks, what we're all thinking, do you think Manson was using MK Ultra techniques he learned at this clinic to exert influence over his followers? Interesting. And Mr. Tom O'Neill, I got an itch. Sorry, got an itch on the pecker. It's just all the way down there. All right, Tom O'Neill. I never answered that question, Tom Neal says. What I like to do is quote someone who is a lawyer and a psychiatrist, Alan Shefflin, who wrote one of the first books on MK Ultra called The Mind Manipulators. I once asked him, do you think Manson was a CIA experiment gone wrong? Do you think Manson somehow had access to what the CIA was doing? Maybe the technology was shared with him, or maybe he was part of an experiment. But obviously, I don't think the CIA would have wanted what happened to happen the way it happened. You know, an actress 8 months pregnant, stabbed 7 or 8 times. Shefflin said, I don't think it was an experiment gone wrong. I think it was an experiment gone right. Ooh. I think there is a good likelihood that Manson is part of MK Ultra, whether he was knowledgeable about it or not, but I haven't been able to definitively prove it. I chased the story for 20 years, hoping to get conclusive information one way or the other, but I could neither disprove nor prove it to my satisfaction. Finally, I thought, well, at the very least, I want to get everything that I did find out there. And he did so in this book right here, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. All right. And that's written by Tom O'Neill, released in 2019. Everything that I've read about it, it's a pretty damn good book, super interesting. If you're interested in Charles Manson, obviously, and a lot of these programs that the CIA was running. Another really good book that I have up here for you guys. And by the way, I'm going to figure out at some point this weekend how to link all of this information in below the video on YouTube. So every web page that I go over today, you'll have it pop up in the links. So you can actually, read about these books, and if you want to get them, go ahead and grab them. This is The Mind Manipulators, that was written by that Alan Shefflin. This is one of the first books written about MK Ultra, and is still considered to be a pretty good account of everything that happened in MK Ultra. So go ahead if you're interested. Take a gander or try. The hardcover used sells for $185. Woo, geez. Okay, maybe get that shit on Kindle. All right, so that about covers what we got for MK Ultra. Pretty crazy. Long story short is, yeah, was the conspiracy theory was that the government was using drugs and a whole series of different shit to find ways to mind control American citizens, or well, mind control other people, but they were performing experiments on a lot of American citizens, a lot of them without them knowing. This was happening in a variety of different ways, including essentially a brothel that was ran by the CIA, where they would dose men who were having sex with hookers and then do only God knows what behind a two-way mirror. I think we can all fill in the blanks there with our imagination, even if we don't want to. And they could be partly responsible for the creation of Charles Manson, potentially, and even a little bit responsible for the creation, probably not the creation, but at least the intensification of Whitey Bulger, even. So a lot of good, no, very little good came out of that. A lot of bad. A lot of bad came out of MK Ultra. Same with this next one. We're going to move on to the next one, which is doctors being paid to discredit the effects of smoking on lung cancer and health. So this, to especially a lot of the younger viewers, might seem like something that isn't a conspiracy theory. Like, we all are well aware that smoking causes lung cancer. That's not a question. Some people might not be aware. They might only lightly be aware that the big tobacco industry, the 5 big tobacco companies is what usually they mean by big tobacco, put a lot of money and effort into taking that information and squashing it. And it has came out numerous times throughout American history. This most recent time, where big tobacco was punished, and we'll go over that here in a minute, was actually in 2006. So we're going to read about that. This goes far back, and we'll go into the far back too. But for now, we're going to focus on what happened in 2006, because this was 2 years before I graduated high school. I mean, to a lot of you youngins, it's ancient history, but to me, I never heard anything about this. So, on August 17th, 2006, federal judge Gladys Kessler found the major tobacco companies, including Altria, which is Philip Morris, and R.J. Reynolds, guilty on civil racketeering charges, which is organized criminal activity. On that day, she issued a final judgment and a 1,682-page opinion, that's a lot of pages, that found the companies had been covered up the health risks associated with smoking and marketing their products to children for decades. Tobacco companies were ordered in Judge Kessler's 2006 decision to issue the corrective statements in newspapers and on TV. After years of appeal and delay by the defendants, the ads ran in 2017 and 18. So that's only 18. We're only talking about 7 years ago. Subsequent court decisions in 2018 also required corrective statements on tobacco company websites and on cigarette packs. Then in December 2022, so just 3 years ago, a court order was issued requiring corrective statements to be posted at around 200,000 retail outlets across the country. These signs were required to be posted starting October 1st, 2023, and are required to be up until June 30th, 2025. So that's about to be done just here in a couple months. The public can assist with ensuring retail stores are displaying these signs at these links right here. Here are 10 of the most troubling findings of fact that the judge found in her ruling against these tobacco companies. So here's 10 things they found in the 2006 court ruling hearing. 1. The tobacco companies concealed and suppressed research data and other evidence that nicotine is addictive. They've been doing that one for a very long time. We'll get into more on how we know that, but this is the actual court case, the actual findings from the judge herself. Again, a lot of you probably didn't even know that this was a conspiracy theory, that big tobacco companies had been doing this. I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, where it was just everybody knew that cigarettes were bad for you, or at least most people that you talk to were aware of that. But people forget how long cigarettes have been around and how they were originally marketed. We'll get a little bit into that too. But yeah, so they founded that tobacco companies were in fact concealing and suppressing research data that nicotine was addictive. They were also falsely marketed and promoting low tar light cigarettes as less harmful than full flavor cigarettes in order to keep people smoking and sustain corporate revenues. So that's one that a lot of people might not know. In fact, a lot of people in my generation that I know who smoke light cigarettes think light cigarettes are less harmful than full cigarettes. And they're not. Light cigarettes are just as bad for you as regular ones. There's nothing about them that is good, less bad for you. Okay. And that directly becomes of tobacco companies' marketing efforts. The tobacco companies, number three, the tobacco companies' own internal records showed that smokers switched to low tar light cigarettes rather than quit smoking because they believe they are less harmful. So tobacco companies knew that people were switching to these cigarettes to try to make a change for the betterment of their health. Which was based on a lie that they had told them. Four, the tobacco companies recognize that smokers choose light, low tar cigarettes for a perceived health benefit. Defendants internally recognize that smokers rely on the claims made for light cigarettes as an excuse rationale for not quitting smoking. I have a lot of friends that fell into that boat. I never did. You know, when I was a 13-year smoker, I quit smoking, at this point, 5, 6 years ago. But I smoked for about 13 years straight, and I was a heavy smoker. And to this day, I'll tell you, I fucking love cigarettes, man. I fucking love it. If I walk by somebody who's smoking a cigarette, I'm like, oh god, it's like the best air freshener in the world. You know, it's amazing. It's nirvana. But when I smoked cigarettes, I was like, fuck that light shit. It's for pussies. I'm going full blown, full bodied, filter off, Lucky Strikes. I used to smoke Camel Wides. They quit Camel Wides when I graduated high school, though, or somewhere roundabouts. But either way, though, yeah, I know a lot of friends who did that, and that ended up being a bunch of bullshit, and they knew it was bullshit. Let's see, this is number five. Starting in the 1950s and lasting at least through 2006, different tobacco companies at different times and using different methods have intentionally marketed to young people under the age of 21 in order to recruit replacement smokers to ensure the economic future of the tobacco industry. That's a little bit dirty, right? Because this has been a law for a long time. You can't promote this shit to kids because we knew it was bad. Number six, the tobacco companies' youth smoking prevention programs are not designed to effectively prevent youth smoking. Well, no shit. This is one of these things, right, where you're going to task the tobacco companies with preventing people from using their products. You know, like, I mean, you might have been a fucking idiot there, right? That was a little bit dumb. You know, you probably shouldn't have done that. You probably should have done it yourself. But that doesn't take away from the fact that tobacco companies did exactly what most logical people would expect them to do. And they did the exact opposite of what they were supposed to do, and they marketed to children. Tobacco companies have publicly denied what they eternally acknowledged, that ETS or secondhand smoke is hazardous to non-smokers. Again, same thing. They had plenty of knowledge of information on that and didn't let it out. And of course, it is. We all well aware now that secondhand smoke is very bad to other people. 8, the tobacco company's internal records recognize that secondhand smoke is hazardous to non-smokers. 9, the tobacco company's marketing is a substantially contributing factor to youth smoking initiation. And number 10, this case is about an industry and in particular these companies that survive and profit from selling a highly addictive product which causes diseases that lead to a staggering number of deaths per year, an immeasurable amount of human suffering and economic loss. These burps, man. I don't know what it is, but as soon as Twitch starts, dude, I'm just burping up a fucking storm. It can't be helped. An immeasurable amount of human suffering and economic loss, and a profound burden on our national healthcare system. The tobacco companies have known many of these facts for at least 50 years or more. Despite that knowledge, they have consistently, repeatedly, and with enormous skill and sophistication denied these facts to the public, the government, and to the public health community. So there is a court of law giving you the information, telling you, and I'm sure you can go out and find, actually, I think it was linked here. There's the link to the 16,000 word page opinion, or 16,000 page opinion. written by Judge Gladys Kessler, explaining the findings from this court hearing. And so there's your proof that this was indeed something that tobacco companies were doing. At one point, this was a conspiracy theory, though. This wasn't a thing. At one point, and maybe not in 2006, I think in 2006, the big part that was conspiratorial was the light cigarettes. That was something that a lot of people believed, that light cigarettes were better for you. Like I said, I have friends, had friends, might still, I think still have friends that smoke light cigarettes because they still think that light cigarettes are bad for you. And at one point, other people were saying, no, bro, like, they're not. They're not good for you. They're not any less bad for you than regular cigarettes. So don't you just smoke regular cigarettes or quit smoking, right? That and the selling cigarettes to kids was, I believe, a lot of people assumed that tobacco was doing that. But then it came out in court that they 100% were doing that. But this goes back even farther, right? And I got a timeline for you. It starts in 1953. There is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes of lung cancer. So to all you youngins out there, yes, as a matter of fact, at one point, big tobacco companies had done research proving that it was bad for you and were putting out advertisements saying no, it absolutely wasn't. Doctors were coming out, doctors who were paid by big tobacco, and we're saying, yeah, no, cigarettes is not bad for you. It's not bad for you. Other doctors were coming out and saying, yes, it's horrible for you. And people were having a sneaking suspicion. But at that point, it was just a conspiracy theory. It wasn't a reality. You can look at this ad for Camel cigarettes. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. In the 1950s, extensive studies from the United Kingdom and the United States pointed to smoking as a likely cause of lung cancer. While it wasn't the first time the correlation was explored, the public began to worry. Even researchers working for the tobacco industry appeared interested in the link. In a 1953 confidential report for R.J. Reynolds, one researcher noted that clinical data supported the theory that cigarettes could be cancer-causing. The tobacco industry had to respond to reassure existing and potential customers. In 1954, tobacco companies in the U.S. released the Frank Statement to cigarette smokers. In the piece, the tobacco companies denied the link to cancer, stating, "We believe the products we make are not injurious to health." They sought to cast doubt on the independent study's findings related to lung cancer, saying there is no proof that cigarette smoking is one of the causes. Research suggests, however, that tobacco companies knew by the mid-1950s that their products were linked to cancer and were in fact addictive. Oh, that's the other half of it. They not only denied the claim that cigarettes are bad for you or cause cancer specifically, they also denied the claim that cigarettes were in any way addictive. Which is a crazy thought nowadays, right? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. All the crazy, not so good shit that I put into my body in my life. Cigarettes was easily one of the more difficult ones to quit. I mean, most people say that. I know a guy who was an alcoholic and got sober. He's, 17, 18 years sober, kicking ass, taking names, badass motherfucker, worked real hard on his sobriety, still does every single day. The hardest thing for him to quit was chewing tobacco. To ask him, he will tell you, oh, quitting chewing tobacco was way harder than quitting any sort of alcohol. And, he was very much addicted to alcohol. He was an alcoholic, Same thing for me. There were things that, I think I've mentioned it in other streams that I did, and pretty hardcore stuff. Cigarettes was still the most difficult by far. But anyways, in 1964, we won't accept the idea that there are harmful agents in tobacco. So this trend keeps going. In the early 1960s, 2 reports came out that clearly stated that smoking was a proven cause of lung cancer. The 1962 report from the Royal College of Physicians and the 1964 report from the U.S. Surgeon General publicly concluded that cigarette smoking is a cause of lung cancer and that smoking far outweighs other risk factors. Yet the industry continued to publicly deny the harm of cigarettes. Philip Morris's stance in 1964 was, "We don't accept the idea that there are harmful agents in tobacco." To try to dissuade people from cutting back or quitting, the agency turned to a tactic it had used in the past and still uses today, creating doubt and confusion around public health research. An internal 1969 memo from a British American Tobacco (BAT) subsidiary said it in plain language. Doubt is our product since it is the best way of competing with the body of fact that exists in the mind of the public. It is also the means of establishing a controversy. So then we get to the 1976. 12-year effort ends with unprecedented flavor and low tar smoke. So this is where they start. This is where they start selling low tar cigarette smoking, is in the 1976, which again we just went over in 2006. Since 1976, they've been attempting to convince the public that low tar cigarettes or light cigarettes were less harmful than regular cigarettes. And we just found in 2016, they found in a court hearing, you guys are a bunch of fucking liars. And what else is new? You've been lying since 1953, so you could make money off of people dying. There's a really good movie, by the way, not to stray too far from the subject. This is right in the vein. If you haven't ever seen the movie Thank You for Smoking with Aaron Eckhart, there's a couple other good actors in it, but Aaron Eckhart is in there. He's the main guy. That is a really good movie, a really interesting movie about a lobbyist for big tobacco and what his life is like. Kind of entertaining, kind of funny, very stark, very dark humor in it. You know, so if you like dark humor movies, that's a good one. Check that out. It goes over a lot of this shit. 1987. I know there's no proof my smoke can hurt you. This is the point at which big tobacco companies, I'm not going to go heavily read into all this for you because it goes for quite a bit down here. It's not actually that long, but I'm not going to get too heavy into it because I got a lot of conspiracy theories to cover with you guys. And we got just over an hour and I've only covered two, right? So I wanted to cover as many as I could. I made a very big list of conspiracy theories that ended up being true. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 of them. And I didn't think I would hit all 13. I thought I would get as far as I could get in my 2 hour window. And then I would leave the rest of the web pages that I have for another stream at a later date about conspiracy theories that ended up being true. I'll just pop up occasionally while I'm talking about these conspiracy theories, reminding you of the ones that ended up being true and the ones that are probably 100% false. I'll do probably a list of conspiracy theories that were 100% false, that we know for a fact aren't real. That would be a cool stream. But in the meantime, so I'm not going to dive too deep into this. It's important to note that it is around 1987 where they begin another big lie, right? So at this point, they've been caught in multiple lies. They were caught lying about cigarettes causing cancer. They were lying about cigarettes being addictive. They just recently started on their next big lie that light cigarettes are better for you than full flavored. And they're now starting on a fourth big giant lie, which is secondhand smoke can't hurt you. And then later on, they'll start into another big lie of we're not selling this to children. 1994. I don't believe that that nicotine or our products are addictive. So they're still going with this one. 1994. They are still telling people that they aren't addictive. In 1994, CEOs of 7 major tobacco companies testified under oath to the U.S. Congress that they did not believe nicotine to be addictive. Joseph Taddeo, then president of the U.S. Tobacco Company, told Congress, "I don't believe that nicotine or our products are addictive." The other 6 CEOs agreed. Yet the tobacco industry's knowledge of addictive nature of nicotine goes back to at least the 1960s. Tobacco company statements were clear. An executive from Brown and Williamson, a BAT subsidiary, wrote in 1963, "Nicotine is addictive. We are then in the business of selling nicotine, an addictive drug." A BAT document from 1967 stated, "Smoking is an addictive habit attributable to nicotine, and the form of nicotine affects the rate of absorption by the smoker." So they knew all this. They knew all this for over 3 decades by this point. And so that's kind of the end of it, but you get a whole shit pot full of them. We're going to focus for a brief second on these 1994 statements that they made, because this was a pretty big moment in history for America. There is a really good movie about this. One of my more favorite Russell Crowe, and one of my favorite Al Pacino movies. I was going to say one of my favorite Al Pacino Russell Crowe movies, but I think this is the only movie with Russell Crowe and Al Pacino. It's called The Insider. That was released in 1999. This is a really good drama that tells the story of a research chemist who came under personal and professional attack when he decided to appear in a 60 minutes expose on big tobacco. So, Mr. What's this Australian's name? Russell Crowe. I forget if he is Australian or what he is, but this guy, Russell Crowe, pays the researcher who is essentially being harassed by the big tobacco companies as he sets up for a 60 minutes episode with the reporter played by Al Pacino. What was the guy's name? Jeffrey Wigand, Russell Crowe's character, and Lowell Bergman. Lowell? That's a name, Lowell Bergman. These are real people, and this was based on a true story. All Hollywood movies take creative license with the true story, but this is based on the true story of this true man, Jeffrey Wiggins, who really did testify against big tobacco, and for a brief moment there had his life completely torn apart by it in a very sad way. We're going to read a little bit on that guy now. This is Jeffrey Wiggins' biography. Right, so background. Jeffrey Wiggin earned academic degrees with distinction from the University of Buffalo School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences and a master's degree in secondary education from the University of Louisville. For 4 years, Dr. Wiggin taught Japanese and science, biology, chemistry, and physical sciences. Oh, wow. At DuPont Manual High School, a national school of academic excellence in Louisville, okay, it's in Kentucky, so it's Louisville. They say Louisville. They get pretty, upset at you in Kentucky if you call it Louisville or Louisville. They're like, it's Louisville. And it's like, huh. All right, only because you're from Kentucky. But he received national recognition for his teaching skills when he was awarded the Sallie Mae First Class Teacher of the Year in 1996. He was one of 51 teachers recognized nationwide. Dr. Wiggin has always been a teacher, but not always in the classroom. He held senior management positions with a number of leading healthcare companies, including Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, and then served as vice president for research and development for Brown & Williamson Tobacco Corporation from December 1988 to March 1993. After his separation from Brown & Williamson, Dr. Wiggin cooperated with government agencies investigating the tobacco industry. Dr. Kessler, the former commissioner of the FDA, has acknowledged that Dr. Wiggins' assistance was central to the FDA's investigation into the role and the effects of nicotine in tobacco products. So this guy was the whistleblower that blew all this shit wide open in the 1994 case. In 1995, Dr. Wiggin achieved national prominence when he became the tobacco industry's highest-ranking former executive to address public health and smoking issues. He made the truth known to the public about the industry's disregard for health and safety during an interview with 60 Minutes. That's that movie, The Insider. And during a deposition, he was compelled to give an action against the tobacco companies. A lawsuit was filed against him by Brown & Williamson because of his public disclosures about the industry's efforts to minimize the health and safety issue of tobacco use. Louisville-based Brown & Williamson is owned by BAT Industries, BAT, the world's second largest tobacco concern. The lawsuit was dismissed as a condition of the June 20th, 1997 historic $368 billion settlement between the attorneys general of 40 states and the tobacco industry. Dr. Wiggin has received numerous awards and public recognition for his actions in revealing tobacco company research and marketing practices, and he continues his efforts to reduce teen tobacco use through a nonprofit organization he formed called Smoke Free Kids Incorporated. And this, actually, they say it right here. Russell Crowe portrayed Dr. Wiggin in the film The Insider. This guy, for the brief while that he was fighting against these tobacco companies, they made his life hell. They sent people to spy on him. They had, they were facing him with a lawsuit. He was briefly taken away from his job. It just made his life a living hell. And that's kind of what the movie's about, is how much this whistleblower went through to break open this information to the public. And so that can be a pretty harrowing experience, being a whistleblower, especially against big tobacco. They may be a bunch of fucking liars, but they're a bunch of fucking liars with a lot of fucking money. And that can be a very dangerous group of people, which leads me into our next conspiracy theory that ended up being true, very closely related. Big tobacco aren't the only big dogs in town throwing their money around, lying to the American public about the health concerns of their products. I would like to introduce you to the sugar industry, who is currently, and has been for some time now, giving big tobacco a run for their money in the bullshit department. So let's fly over to the YouTube screen. This is a CBC News article, very brief, only about 3 minutes, so we're going to watch the whole thing, giving you a rundown. This is the sugar industry paid scientists for favorable research. Oh, and again, before we start, the reason I'm talking about this is because this was a conspiracy theory. We'll go over this in a little bit more detail after the video, but this is yet another conspiracy theory that people thought this might be true. This might be the case. Perhaps the sugar industry is lying, or that certain scientists are lying when they, researchers are lying when they say that it is fat that is bad for you, that is causing all these health concerns. And it might end up being sugar, and that ended up being true. So, but let's watch the video.
What makes a woman look good in the kitchen? While the U.S. sugar industry stepped up its ad campaign to sweeten our palates in the 1960s,
cherry cheese pie from bags of Imperial pure cane sugar.
it was quietly paying the country's top Ivy League school to discredit evidence of the health risks of sugar.
So I do just want to note that these guys, this isn't very well known even to this day. These sugar companies have been bullshitting people since the 1960s. That was 1964 is when they, CBS article here says they were teaming up with an Ivy League school to discredit evidence of other researchers. Discredit evidence of health risks of sugar, excuse me. So that's been happening since 1964, right? Big Tobacco came in around 1953. Sugar came in just after them in 1964. So check it out.
Health risks of sugar. Codenamed Project 226, the industry was funneling thousands of dollars to a pair of influential Harvard nutritionists, led by Dr. Mark Hegsted. One secret memo spells out the terms of the payoff: half to be paid when you start work on the project, and the remainder when you inform us that the article has been accepted for publication. The scientists' job was to review and dismiss findings that linked high sugar consumption to heart disease, and instead blame saturated fat and cholesterol, giving sugar a free pass. In one memo, Hegsted responds to the Sugar Association: "We are well aware of your particular interest and will cover this as well as we can." The findings would be published in a top medical journal.
It was such a prestigious institution with such an impeccable record, Harvard University, and that it was the New England Journal of Medicine.
So I took this paper and crossed out where it said tobacco and put in sugar.
Schmidt is part of a University of California team that uncovered Project 226 and the documents at Harvard's med school library.
Notice how she was talking about tobacco, right? The similarities between these two cases. Big Tobacco convincing the public, lying about research that tobacco is bad for you. And of course, sugar doing the same. Makes you think, should make you think, all right? Like, look, I like to joke a lot on this channel, and particularly you'll see me joking a lot on the Conspiracy Theory Thursdays about having my tinfoil hat on and things like that. I myself am not a huge conspiracy theorist, but it should still make you think, who else is out there telling you, oh, this is healthy for you, or oh, this isn't bad for you, and as it turns out, it's really fucking bad.
The California professors have spent years unearthing revelations about the sugar industry's deep influence on public policy with its simple message.
Don't worry about sugar. Focus on cholesterol and fat. That really shapes the scientific agendas for scientists. It may even shape funding agendas.
That message left out the risks of high sugar diets, which are now being blamed for the obesity crisis. And today there is growing scientific consensus sugar could play a larger role in heart disease risk than fat and cholesterol.
The problem is bigger than this. It's about all of the food industry influencing federal government policy.
This lawyer says blatant conflicts of interest persist today in Canada. Coke has poured millions into funding research that says exercise, not diet, is the best way to fight obesity, and that's just one example.
Health Canada's Food Expert Advisory Committee, in which about half of the members of the advisory committee are either representatives of the food industry or have investments in it or consult with it.
The lead Harvard scientist in Project 226 went on to work for the U.S. government to help draft dietary guidelines, which for decades resisted daily limits on sugar. As for the U.S. Sugar Association, it admits it should have been transparent about those payments to Harvard, but insists that doesn't mean the research is tainted. Vic Adopia, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, we should definitely believe them there when they say that, right? So yeah, there you go. This is yet another conspiracy theory in the same vein as Big Tobacco. Major corporate interests paying a lot of money to researchers and scientists to ignore data or falsify data, making their products seem more healthy, or at least less bad for your health, because those are two different things, than it really is. So, and in the case of sugar, this has resulted in not just high sugar diets, like not just people willingly ingesting lots of sugar, which, hey, I ate a whole roll of Smarties before the stream ends, okay? A whole one of these bad boys. All right, I'm being a little silly, but I love my candy. I fucking love sugar. I do. It's amazing. So look, not trying to fucking, diss the thing that I enjoy as much as I do. But it's more than just people willingly ingesting large quantities of sugar. This resulted in a lot of food companies willingly using large amounts of sugar as ingredients in their products. Oop, did I hear a crack? I feel like there's a crack. Maybe that was my Smarties bag. Okay. Anyways, a crackle that popped from the shit. I am going to take a look at that real quick. Yeah, 15 DPC highest execution. That's not good. That's the NVIDIA kernel again. And WD, that Windows one. Okay, well, I'll be working on that a little more tonight to try to get rid of that. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and keep talking about this. So, yeah, it is, the damage that was done by Big Sugar, obviously, we don't even almost need to discuss the damage that was done by Big Tobacco coming out and pretending and not coercing, but paying off scientists to continue pretending with them that tobacco was not bad for you or addictive, secondhand smoke wasn't bad, all those things, untold amounts of damage, untold amounts of death from those particular corporations doing that. The sugar corporations, have also done untold amounts of damage by creating a public sentiment that sugar is not all that bad for you, which led to other food companies putting large quantities of sugar in all various kinds of products, from like bread companies who have massive quantities of sugar in their bread compared to bread that has, regular bread that has no sugar added. Milk companies is another one. Fruit juices for kids were filled to the brim with sugar. And we're talking about, not just candies, all sorts of, canned veggies and fruits. Think canned fruits, sure, but canned veggies, even some brands of canned veggies, if you look at the sugar content of them and compare that to a can that has no sugar added, it's pretty fucking wild. The reality is sugar makes everything taste better almost. When I make a good pasta sauce, I make a mean pasta sauce, baby. Ooh, real good red sauce or bolognese. I don't know how to say it. It doesn't matter because I'm amazing at making it. Bolognese sauce. Throw just a tablespoon of sugar in there. Not even a tablespoon, like a teaspoon of sugar in there. Get the fuck out of here. It's amazing. Makes the whole sauce that much better. Puts everything together, right? But yeah, unfortunately, there is so much sugar in the American diet. And a big reason for that was sugar companies that succeeded in convincing people for decades that sugar was not actually a problem, that it was instead saturated fats and cholesterol, which are things that you should monitor still. That's not to say that either of those things are perfectly healthy in massive doses. Then again, nothing is healthy for you at too high of a dose, right? If you drink too much water, you die. If you intake too much oxygen, it kills you. So there's nothing in the world that is healthy at too high of a dose. Everything has its upper limit. But sugar companies convince people that saturated fats and cholesterol that was the main problem, and the main problem and most likely is sugar. The Guardian has a really good article that came out a long time ago, the long read, because it's obviously a long read, The Sugar Conspiracy, that details all of this. We're not going to dive through this entire article because I have a couple other here in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and take a quick break and throw up some other web pages and kind of sift through them, so I have the stream a little bit more organized for those of you who are watching and enjoying it and enjoying the flow. Hopefully, I think the stream is flowing a lot better than my Gilles de Reyes stream or my Large Hadron Collider stream. Those streams were kind of clusterfucks because the information was so all over the place. This one's flowing a little bit better. I want to keep that going, so I'm going to take like a 5-minute break just to run through what web pages I have left to show you guys the rest of the conspiracy theories we need to cover because we're only on conspiracy theory number 3 of 13 that ended up being true. So we're definitely, and we're over an hour into it. We only got 50 minutes left. We're definitely going to do another one of these streams for sure. But still, so I'm not going to read the entire sugar conspiracy for you, because look at this. It just goes, and it just goes, and it just goes. And it just goes. It just keeps going. Whoever wrote this just really loves to write. I wish I enjoyed writing as much as this person. If I did, I would be a millionaire by now. But we're not going to read this whole thing, right? Like I said, I will totally link this article below the video on YouTube for those of you who do want to read it, because it is a very interesting article. It's long, but it's worth reading. It dives over what the potential effects were of this thing, and it dives over how this became a conspiracy theory, because again, that's the point. The reality was there was scientists, there was doctors, there were people who were saying for a very long time, and I know this because this also included in the 90s my dad, who owned a nutritional supplement manufacturing company, who was very certain, who also went to college for nutrition, was very certain that cholesterol is not this horrible thing that everybody says that it is. And, he was certain that sugar had a lot to do with it. And this was a conspiracy theory. This was something that people looked at and said, that's not what the science says, you fucking idiot, you fucking stupid motherfucker. That was the attitude that certain college educated folks who were determined that they were much smarter than the rest of us, that was the attitude they had towards a lot of people who were saying, no, look, like, I think this science that you're quoting is wrong. I think the studies are wrong. There's other studies that are saying that those studies are wrong, and I agree with these other studies. Some people did not want to accept that. So it became a conspiracy theory. It wasn't a huge a divisive subject. This wasn't like, I would, not to bring too much of politics in it, but nowadays the right and the left, everybody just fucking hates everybody in the political sphere nowadays. That's why I tend to kind of gravitate away from politics in my stream. I'm already a new streamer. Nobody's watching me. The last thing I want to do is give everybody a reason to fucking hate me. So I don't dive too deep in politics, but the sugar conspiracy was never something like that, where it was super divisive, like, the sugar lovers and the sugar haters. But it did have some divisiveness in the public eye, particularly in the nutritional industry. There was a bit of divisiveness regarding this particular subject. It was considered a conspiracy theory, much like Big Tobacco was, and even more so MK Ultra. But so we'll read a little bit into this. I figured I'd read the intro for you guys, just to give you guys a quick idea of just how how much people believed in this up until the point that it became legitimate. All of this came out that the sugar industry was in fact lying, how strongly people believed that sugar was fine for you. So in 1972, a British scientist sounded the alarm that sugar, and not fat, was the greatest danger to our health. But his findings were ridiculed and his reputation ruined. How did the world's top nutrition scientists get it so wrong for so long? By Ian Leslie. Robert Lustig is a pediatric endocrinologist at the University of California, who specializes in the treatment of childhood obesity. A 90-minute talk he gave in 2019 titled Sugar, the Bitter Truth has now been viewed more than 6 million. I almost did not catch that, Bert. You almost got an ear of it, but I got it. Getting fast, man. In fact, quick on the draw. A 90-minute talk he gave in 2009 titled Sugar, the Bitter Truth has now been viewed more than 6 million times on YouTube. In it, Lustig argues forcefully that fructose, a form of sugar ubiquitous in modern diets, is a poison culpable of America's obesity epidemic. A year or so before the video was posted, Lustig gave a similar talk to a conference of biochemists in Adelaide, Australia. Afterwards, a scientist in the audience approached him. Surely, the man said, you've read Yudkin. Lustig shook his head. John Yudkin, said the scientist, was a British professor of nutrition who had sounded the alarm on sugar back in 1972 in a book called Pure, White, and Deadly. I have actually heard of this book. I forget who in my family read it, but it might have been my little brother who read it, but somebody I know read this book when I was a kid. Quote, if only a small fraction of what we know about the effects of sugar were to be revealed in relation to any other material used as a food additive, wrote Yudkin, that material would promptly be banned. The book did well, but Yudkin paid a high price for it. Prominent nutritionists combined with the food industry to destroy his reputation, and his career never recovered. He died in 1995, a disappointed, largely forgotten man. And that's pretty sad. That's a bummer, man. History is riddled with the forgotten corpses of do-gooders. And it is a very sad state of affairs. It's one of the reasons why it takes so much courage to be a good person nowadays, because it's unfortunate to look in through history. Now, there's also a lot of heroes in all of the world history, American history, pick a country. In their history, there's going to be heroes that were rewarded for their valiant efforts. But unfortunately, there's, especially in the realm of science, it's kind of a bloodbath. And there is doctors, medical doctors, and there's scientists, researchers who have blown whistles and put forward data that ended up being true, put forward theories that ended up being true and very important to our standard of living nowadays. And they ended up getting fucked in the butt because of it at that time, because what they came out with was just so egregious to the public idea, the public belief that, or to the interests of very powerful interests, that, it ended up destroying their life. So Yudkin was one of them. Perhaps the Australian scientist intended a friendly warning. Lustig was certainly putting his academic reputation at risk when he embarked on a high-profile campaign against sugar. And remember, this is back in 2009, okay? But unlike Yudkin, Lustig is backed by prevailing winds. We read almost every week of new research into the deleterious effects of sugar on our bodies. In the U.S., the latest edition of the government's official dietary guidelines includes a cap on sugar consumption. In the UK, the Chancellor George Osborne has announced a new tax on sugary drinks. Sugar has become dietary enemy number 1. This represents a dramatic shift in priority. For at least the last 3 decades, the dietary archvillain has been saturated fat. When Yudkin was conducting his research into the effects of sugar in the 1960s, a new nutritional orthodoxy was in the process of asserting itself. Its central tenet was that a healthy diet is a low-fat diet. Yudkin led a diminishing band of dissenters who believed that sugar, not fat, was the more likely cause of maladies such as obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. But by the time he wrote his book, the commanding heights of the field had been seized by proponents of the fat hypothesis. Yudkin found himself fighting a rearguard action, and he was defeated. Not just defeated, in fact, but buried. When Lustig returned to California, he searched for Pure, White, and Deadly in bookstores and online to no avail. Eventually, he tracked down a copy after submitting a request to his university library. On reading Yudkin's introduction, he felt a shock of recognition. Holy crap, Lustig thought. This guy got there 35 years before me. So that is how serious the industry was about burying this particular knowledge. And for the next 30 years, up until about the 1990s, was when people really started to accept the fact that, oh, okay, no, sugar is indeed bad. This article is a really good article that goes over almost the entire history, gives you a whole lot of the names and these names of these specific studies and these specific researchers that were involved in all of this, the companies that were involved in all of this nonsensical research, a lot to research for yourself if you are interested in this particular story, because it is a good one. It is a eye-opener for certain. It definitely opens your eyes as to what major interests can do. So, good lesson here. It isn't just the government that can fuck everybody up. The government absolutely can. The government can MK Ultra the fuck out of you, drop some acid in your drink, get you to bang a hooker, and then masturbate to it behind a mirror. The government has done that, okay? So, that is what it is. But major corporations in this not this country, just this country, but plenty of other countries too, are just as capable of committing atrocities and then covering it for the sake of profit. And a lot of times those things might be slightly apparent to certain people in society, but until fact comes out that proves it, a lot of them remain conspiracy theories. So that's a important lesson. Anyways, before we hop in, I got the new conspiracy theory, the fourth one that we're going to research, popping up here in a minute. Let me swap over here so you can't read ahead. But I'm gonna go ahead and throw you on the break screen for a minute because it's a very pretty screen, and I think you'll like it. And I'm just kidding. It's just a regular screen. It'll give you some time to take a piss, get some food, go and grab yourself some sugar to eat while we're in a smoke cigarette. Take a smoke break, eat some sugar, then come back, and we will talk about the government poisoning booze during Prohibition, which, given the name of the stream, well, you kind of know how that conspiracy theory went. But we're going to jump into that. I'm going to take 5 minutes to just organize the next few web pages that I'm going to throw up for you guys. Okay, so we'll be back here in about 5. Okay. And we're back. So I've looked through the web pages that I have, and I don't believe that we're going to get through all of them, which is fine. That gives me a lot of material to go over when I do my next conspiracy theories that ended up being true stream, because I could probably do at least 2 or 3 of these things. There's so many of them. I also wrote down that I needed to do a conspiracy theories that weren't true one too, so, and do a little research on that. But we're going to get through as many of these as we can. I got a lot of good ones up here for you. We're going to get into some kind of crazy ones. These next two, this one I don't believe is a popular one. In fact, this one blew my mind when I first heard it. I didn't believe that this was a thing, but it was a fucking thing. And then the one after that is a pretty common one. And then we get into some of the sadder stuff. So I'm hoping that we can get through a couple of the sadder conspiracy theories and not end the stream on a sad note that makes you all fucking depressed, and jump into a couple of the funnier ones, because I do have some pretty entertaining ones that come up. And if we get too close to the ends, then I'll maybe just cover one of the sad ones and then at least get one of the funnier ones in there that are a little bit more entertaining. But let's go ahead and start then. So this is the government poisoning booze during Prohibition. Totally did not know that this was a fucking thing. Apparently it was. And apparently it was a conspiracy theory thing that people used to talk about in the Prohibition days that ended up being true. So let's read about it. In the Poisoner's Handbook, that's this book right here. This is an excerpt from the book, or this is a review talking about the book. We're going to read just a couple pages into this. In the Poisoner's Handbook, the toxins in question, such as arsenic and cyanide, and the tales of how they were delivered to the victims often sound like something straight out of an Agatha Christie. So the book in question, The Poisoner's Handbook, is just about how these various different toxins were discovered and how they were used to poison people. Consider, for example, the case of a woman who decided to dispatch her newly acquired 6-year-old stepson by sending him a box of cyanide-laced chocolates while he was out of state visiting his aunt. That's sad. That's, let's read on. Much more common, however, during that era of Prohibition were self-induced methanol poisonings, as consumers threw caution to the wind and imbibed whatever they could find. And imbibed? Yeah, I'm going to say imbibed. Often leaving its victims permanently blind when not killing them outright. Methanol was cheaper and much more easy to come by than the more tightly regulated ethanol, and was mixed into much of what unscrupulous bootleggers were smuggling into the speakeasies of New York. That's a very long sentence there. That's actually, if you guys have ever heard of the White Lightning, or there's a song called White Lightning that speaks of it, but the concept of drinking until you go blind, that was actually invented during Prohibition, when people would drink methanol instead of ethanol. It would make people go blind. Bootleg whiskey had a knack for that. They would talk about moonshine. Moonshine's so strong it makes you go blind. Well, it wasn't so much that it was strong, it was that it was the wrong fucking thing. But that was a thing. But as author Deborah Blum points out, the bootleggers were but partly to blame. In 1926, the federal government, in an effort to enforce the so-called Noble Experiment, mandated adding poisons, including methanol, to industrial alcohol so as to discourage people from drinking it. Unfortunately, instead of leading to decreased consumption, this only resulted in more death and suffering, with the toll from that year's Christmas celebration reaching 23 dead and dozens more blinded in New York City alone. Distraught at the horror he was witnessing, Norris issued a public statement on December 28, 1926, stating that the government knows it is not stopping drinking by putting poison in alcohol. It knows what the bootleggers are doing with it, and yet it continues its poisoning process, heedless of the fact that people determined to drink are daily absorbing that poison. Knowing this to be true, the United States government must be charged with the moral responsibility for the deaths that poisoned liquor causes. Despite public outcry and the rising death toll from poisoned alcohol, which Blum has elsewhere estimated to be approximately 10,000 people, this policy continued until Prohibition was repealed 7 years later. So that's the gist of it. This is a book that it goes over mostly different types of poisons by Deborah Blum, The Poisoner's Handbook. We're going to jump over to this fact check. It's true, U.S. government poisoned some alcohol during Prohibition. The claim. The U.S. government intentionally poisoned alcohol during Prohibition. We are already aware of that. Historical facts can sometimes be stranger than fiction. Even claims that at first sound conspiratorial can be rooted in well-documented history and records. The government once poisoned drinking alcohol to get people to stop drinking. A Facebook post shared almost 500 times reads, "The federal government sometimes proved willing to go to unethical lengths to prevent alcohol consumption. While the government never directly poisoned drinking alcohol, it did take steps to ensure that toxic chemicals were included in industrial alcohols. Such chemicals were commonly converted into drinking alcohol during the Prohibition era, a reality of which officials were aware when approving the practice." So, let's go down to their fact check. Their ruling, this is USA Today, their ruling is true. It is true that the federal government during the Prohibition era mandated that industrial alcohols receive toxic additives, effectively poisoning future supplies of bootleg liquor. Enforcement of Prohibition was multi-pronged. Alongside stringent law enforcement raids, tax auditing, and the surveillance of illicit trade, regulators also actively participated. One result was the death of Americans from poisoned spirits. This claim is rated true because it is supported by our research, which is their fact check sources: history.com, the Library of Congress, Prohibition, a case study of progressive reform, Encyclopedia Britannica, Smithsonian, yes, the U.S. government poisoned alcohol in the 1920s, Time, top 10 Prohibition tales, history.com again, and the Legal Information Institute, 18th Amendment. So yeah, essentially, there's not a lot to read on this. I mean, there's plenty to read on it, but nothing that's going to blow the lid more than that right there. Yes, it was a thing. The U.S. government knew that bootleggers were taking industrial alcohols and turning them into drinking alcohols, and in order to stop that process, in an ill-advised method of trying to stop that process, they decided to add poisons to industrial alcohols, which people inevitably drank and then ended up dying. Let's see. I don't believe either that the government ever apologized for that. You know, I think this goes over mostly what we've already talked about, government's mandate, and it gives us some links here to where you can actually see that, you know. But yeah, I don't believe the government ever apologized for killing people in the interest of stopping them from drinking alcohol. But that's the thing. So that's another one for the government, right? We got 2 for major corporations, big tobacco and the sugar industry fucking everyone over. And then we got 2 for the government, right? MK Ultra and poisoning booze during Prohibition. I just thought this one was interesting. I wanted to bring it up. Not too much reading to do in this particular one, but I wanted to bring it up because I thought it was wild. It was crazy that this was a thing, you know? And you'll have to read a little bit more into it if you want to get to the conspiracy part of it. But this is definitely one of those things that even today, a lot of people, like, I think a lot of people would see that Facebook post and be like, what? Like, the government didn't fucking poison people. And, you know, it would sound like a conspiracy. If somebody told you that, you would fashion them a tinfoil hat and put it on their, you know, oddly shaped head and say, you're a fucking weirdo, bro. That didn't happen. But there you go. It happens. It's a thing. It was done. Nothing we can do about it. We're going to move on to the next one, though, for the sake of time. This next one is a pretty familiar one. A lot of people know about this one. They might not know the name of it. But if the words Operation Paperclip mean anything to you, then you probably already know what I'm going to tell you about. I will throw this to the YouTube screen and let this video by Forgotten History give you a brief rundown of what Operation Paperclip was. But it was yet another conspiracy theory. Spoiler alert, this was one. Balls. We're going to get a death jigger here. Might have to shut the stream down real quick. You guys will still, the stream will still be here. I just got to upload my pages. So let me just reload all my pages. So let me do this real quick. Not entirely sure what exactly is the cause of this yet. I think it might have something to do with those very same drivers that I'm trying to fix right now. But this is like the 3rd time this has happened on stream, which is a big bummer. Right when I leave you guys on a cliffhanger too. What is Operation Paperclip? Well, I'll give you the one part of the one little spoiler alert here. Operation Paperclip There we go. There we go. Okay, nice. Operation Paperclip was yet another example of the government completely fucking American citizens over. So, I think that's nice. That's that. And then I'll bring the stream up here before you guys start getting a whole feedback loop in your screen there. But it looks like we're still live. So, okay, great. Let's just go ahead and continue on like nothing happened, yeah? Okay, so without further ado, Operation Paperclip.
World War II was not just a war of inhumanity and a total annihilation. It was a war of technology and science. Nazi Germany led the world in various technological innovations, all of which were sought after by the Allies, both Western and Soviet, when the war ended. And that included the people who helped create them. How did the United States and Great Britain obtain the best and brightest minds behind Hitler's wonder weapons and science?
Yeah, to pause the video for a second, that is true. Actually, working in recording studios, two pieces of equipment that were very popular. I don't know if it is popular to run into them anymore in recording studios. They might not be as popular pieces of equipment as they used to be, but even as far back as the late 2010s, when I was working in recording studios, they were still fairly popular pieces of equipment to run into a tape machine in a recording studio and a Neumann microphone, usually a U67 or a U87. Those two pieces of equipment were invented by the Nazis. The microphone, the condenser microphone, and the tape machine were both invented for war purposes. And when Nazis were defeated, Americans picked those pieces of equipment up, figured out how they worked. I believe the tape machine was used by Nazis to transport messages from, like, say, Hitler and his generals to the lesser generals on the battlefield. So if anybody ever captured the tapes, they would not know how to play them back. They wouldn't be able to read the messages on them, which were usually commands, military plans, things of that nature. Eventually, we did learn how the tape worked, and thus came the tape machine, which ended up being used to record some of the pretty much all of the music of the 1960s, 50s, 70s, 80s, and well into the 90s and early 2000s. Tape machines were used for that purpose. And then Neumann Microphones is a German company. I don't think they directly worked for the Nazis, but the condenser microphone was another very popular piece of equipment that was made by the Nazis that ended up becoming a very legendary piece of equipment in recording studios. I'm actually speaking into a condenser microphone right now, not a Neumann. Those are pretty expensive, but sure. Anyways, continue.
Why did they want them? What was the result of Operations Lusty and Paperclip? And why was Operation Paperclip so controversial long after the war was over?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former soldier, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, history professor, historian and book author, and we will answer these questions and other issues on this segment of Forgotten History.
This is a pretty entertaining channel, by the way.
Before the end of World War II, British and American intelligence put a plan together to collect as much German technology and the men who created it as possible, and hopefully beat the Soviets in the process. These two programs were called Operations Lusty and Operation Paperclip.
On another note, I don't know if you noticed, Operation Paperclip and MK Ultra and all of the related operations that came from both MK Ultra and Operation Paperclip all came as a result of the Cold War, right? So it was in an effort to beat down the Russians. The American government took some rather extreme measures to study the effects of, one, in the case of MK Ultra, the effects of mind control in various different means of attaining it. And in this case, getting Nazi scientists over to America before the Russians did. So, not to spoil the plot, but that's where we're heading.
Operation Lusty was the scramble for German technology, especially jets, such as the Messerschmitt 262, biological and chemical warfare, rocket aircraft such as the Messerschmitt 163 Comet, and their new silent-running Type 21 and Type 23 electric U-boats, in addition to other scientific experiments and intelligence experts. Operation Paperclip was all about getting the top minds in Nazi Germany, all the top scientists, developers, intelligence specialists, and engineers before the Soviets did.
So there you have it. The conspiracy theory. We're going to still watch more of the video. I'm not going to cut you off right there. But yeah, so Operation Paperclip, for those of you who aren't aware what it is, you may have heard at some point in your life about Nazi scientists coming to America, living in America under various different names. Their history is wiped clean and them living like ordinary Americans. And that is Operation Paperclip. And it really did happen.
Throughout history, conquering nations occupied and appropriated everything within their dominions as spoils of war. Collecting German technology and the men who created it was just a continuance of the age-old practice. The great difference was that the American and British methods were, for the most part, devoted to preventing future wars, healing fresh wounds. They focused upon building new alliances to prevent the spread of communism and beating the Soviets in the technology race and coming Cold War. But the Western Allies also wanted the men behind the weapons and science, and a list was drawn up from the known persons building Adolf Hitler's wonder weapons programs. They compiled a very long and detailed list that numbered over 1,600 names. Following Allied troops in the advance was the Combined Intelligence Objective Subcommittee, or CIOS, which started confiscating documents, materials, machinery, and interrogating German experts to weed out all but the best. Operation Paperclip started before the war ended under the direction of the Office of Strategic Services, under General William Wild Bill Donovan and overseen by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency. Just as Operation Lusty was to deny German technology to the Soviets, Paperclip was meant to deny them access to the men themselves. The race was on. Before the German surrender, the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps was already scouring prisoner of war camps, hospitals, refugee camps, looking for anyone on that list. Making the situation easier for the Americans and British was the fact that every German preferred captivity in the West, as opposed to being in Soviet hands, and for good reason. The Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Chairman, General George C. Marshall, saw the value in these operations, as did others. How would you feel knowing that these were the men who helped expand the lethality of the war? President Harry S. Truman agreed with the plan, yet only signed the authorization for Paperclip on August 7, 1945, but he expressly forbade the inclusion of anyone who was a member of the Nazi Party. The problem with that decision was that anyone who was not a member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party held any meaningful position or had a security clearance to work on the top secret projects.
So, in case you didn't catch that, President Truman was wholeheartedly against this, what ended up being the most controversial aspect of Operation Paperclip. He said, fine, go ahead and get your scientists from Germany, but I don't want them to be Nazis. No Nazis. We don't give a fuck. We're not going to take them. And they still did it. So that is what this, I do really like this YouTube channel, Forgotten History. I watched it a few times, so when I saw that they had a video on it, I had to use it. Pretty big channel, over 700,000 subscribers, over almost 90,000 views on this video alone. So they're a pretty decent sized channel. They go over a lot of different stuff. But we won't watch their whole video. But if we were to, you guys can watch it on your own time because it is a very insightful and educational video. We're going to watch it to like the halfway point. But you will notice if you continue to watch into the video that the narrator for this particular video was pretty supportive of Operation Paperclip, which everybody has the right to their opinion. You can kind of see arguments on both sides. But the point is that this guy is pretty heavily biased in favor of it was a good thing we did this, which I can most certainly see the argument for Harry S. Truman and other people saying, well, I don't think that's true. It was a pretty bad deal that we did this, right? not a good thing, because some of these guys, as we'll learn here in a few minutes, ended up being pretty nasty dudes. This isn't like, some guy who was kind of a lower bottom of the barrel kind of dude who just kind of once called himself a Nazi and kind of walked around with a gun, but he didn't ever hurt anybody and he was never at the death camps. No, a lot of these researchers, a few of them, one in particular, who did in fact do a lot of important things for us in America, ended up being a very nasty dude who did experiments on prisoners in the concentration camps, and then got to come over here to America and build rockets and lived a pretty nice life. And so I can personally understand why a lot of people would be heavily against that being a thing. And I don't particularly think that the argument that we didn't want the Soviets to get them was all that all that convincing of an argument, right? Because, this particular video, again, I enjoy this video, but I do want to point out this video is going to and has already started to kind of portray the idea that it was like, look, man, either we take these scientists or the Russians get them, and then the Russians get the rockets and all of the extraordinary technology that these men did inevitably end up building. And so we just couldn't have that. So we had to take them. And it's like, well, no, you could have just shot them. You could have just shot them. That's what you were over there doing anyways, was shooting Nazis. You could have just gathered them all up, said, hey, you guys, we're going to take a real nice trip out to a real nice camp out in America, and then put them through their own little camp, right? Which I imagine there was way more Americans at the time, and even nowadays, who would have been far more supportive of that alternative than what ended up actually happening, right? This did end up being controversial for a very good reason. So, I don't entirely agree with the idea that it was one or the other. It was like, no, there was a third option. The third option was just shoot them, so nobody else got them. That would have been the easier option, less controversial for shooting the Nazis. But still, wanted to point that out, that this video does kind of go down that path. It's still good a video. I would still recommend watching it and getting their viewpoint on the matter. We are going to watch a little bit more of the video before I switch over to a couple different sources to read exactly who came over with the Nazis, which Nazis came over, and how that process occurred. But let's continue listening.
General George S. Patton was aware of Paperclip and supported the project. In fact, Patton defied the order to not use former members of the Nazi Party in any occupational capacity. Patton ignored the order and collected as many experts as he could. So Truman's position on this matter made absolutely no sense, and Donovan, as well as the future CIA director, Alan Welsh Dulles, knew it. There had even been a discussion with General Dwight D. Eisenhower as to making sure that these top most wanted Germans were kept safe from harm. They understood that Truman's ridiculous order would have severe consequences in the short term.
I knew I was underwater.
And that's a perfect place to stop the video. So again, you can already kind of see, it's always important to note, personally, I don't have too heavy of an ideological view one way or the other, but you can see the kind of language they were using right there to kind of inch you towards the idea of that it would be a silly concept, such a silly concept to think that we probably shouldn't house Nazis on American soil after we just fought a war with them, given the nature of what they did to other human beings. What a silly idea that is, right? Well, no, that's kind of silly to even use that wording, right? Like, it makes a lot of sense why people wouldn't want Nazi scientists on American soil, regardless of how intelligent they ended up being or the amazing things that they might have created. Because yes, that is an objective fact that they did end up creating pretty extraordinary leaps in technology here in America. Despite of that, there is still a legitimate argument for why they wouldn't want that, why people here in America, even nowadays, think that's silly. Why Harry Truman himself said, like, no, don't do that. So for them to frame that as it was a ridiculous, silly, and unwarranted position, I'm paraphrasing, they used other words, but that's essentially what they're getting at, right? Everybody knew how stupid it was to say we shouldn't take Nazi scientists. And it's like, well, you're framing it that way, but, you know, that's just a way of framing it. Let's read on a little bit more. I can't believe we only have 3 minutes. This stream went by super fast. Normally, I'm not a fan of conspiracy theory stuff. When I do the conspiracy theory streams, because they're just so hard to research in a lot of circumstances. These were a lot easier and funner to research because, well, the information's already out there. It's been proven that these things happened, right? So, I had a lot of fun with this particular stream, and this 2 hours went by like that. So we only got a few more minutes. I'm at least going to get through Operation Paperclip with you guys, and that'll be a good place to stop. We don't get into any of the super sad. We also aren't going to get into any of the funny ones neither. I'm going to have to keep those as a surprise for the next time I do a Conspiracy Theories That Were True stream. But let's continue with Operation Paperclip. So, the secret operation to bring Nazi scientists to America. This is all a rough review of information included in Annie Jacobsen's Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought Nazi scientists to America. This is a book based on Annie Jacobsen's research that she did to uncover all of this, which includes government documents and witness reports and a whole bunch of information that confirms that this actually happened. Supposedly, it's a very good book. I think, no, I don't link it anywhere else. So yeah, go ahead and write that book down if you're interested in reading more about Operation Paperclip, because we're not even going to dive even halfway into all the information that's out there. Just give you the rundown of how it essentially worked. So, in the fall of 1944, the United States and its allies launched a secret mission codenamed Operation Paperclip. The aim was to find and preserve German weapons. Well, that was Operation Lusty, the weapons part, including biological and chemical agents, but American scientific intelligence officers quickly realized the weapons themselves were not enough. This article does kind of get that wrong. If you look at the information that's out there and included in that particular video, that was actually Operation Lusty. They decided the United States needed to bring the Nazi scientists themselves to the U.S., thus began a mission to recruit top Nazi doctors, physicians, and chemists, including Werner von Braun, who went on to design the rockets that took man to the moon. The U.S. government went to great lengths to hide the past of scientists they brought to America. Based on newly discovered documents, writer Annie Jacobsen tells the story of the mission and the scientists in her book, Operation Paperclip. That's this book right here. So yeah, I do want to point out, I have a personal philosophy in life that when you are hiding something, you're hiding something because you know that that something is going to piss people off, or that that something is bad and is going to get a nasty reaction from the people you're hiding it from. That's the only logical reason to hide things in the world, right? And so this sentence right here, the U.S. government went to great lengths to hide the past of the scientists they brought to America. This is, not only is the operation itself a great source of controversy, but this part of the operation itself was even another part of what made this operation so controversial, is the government really did put a lot of effort and energy into hiding the identities of these scientists, their past lives. And why did they do that, do you think? Could you just will your imagination, just hit that bowl a couple times, take a couple rips off your bong, and give it a good long thought? Why do you think the U.S. government thought that they had to go to such great lengths to hide the identities of the Nazis? Probably because America was filled to the brim with people who had lost loved ones in an incredibly brutal war that we fought against the fucking Nazis. And a lot of Americans would have taken it upon themselves, not even just the people who fought in World War II, which they most certainly, I'm sure there would at least be a little more than a handful of those guys too, right? But people who had lost entire family, had lost sons and brothers and husbands and fathers in that war, who would have probably taken it upon themselves to find these fuckers and give them a good one too, so to speak, to keep it polite. So yeah, that's probably why the government felt like they shouldn't do this, because at very minimum, it would piss people off. And at very maximum, it would not only result in possibly the death or assassination of a lot of these scientists, but also extreme distrust and lashback towards the government themselves for doing something that they knew people in this country would not like or appreciate. So it's important to note that, So, I like the YouTube channel Forgotten History. I think it's a great channel and I do watch it. But when they try to frame this particular subject as, it was no big deal, it was the smart thing to do, all of you who disagree are fucking morons, right? They didn't exactly say that, but, I'm paraphrasing. When they do frame their argument as such, you do need to keep it in perspective that, well, if it was such a smart idea, then why did the US government lie about it? Well, because it wasn't such a smart idea, because regardless of what came out of it, Americans wouldn't have been okay with it. And a lot of Americans nowadays, even knowing what we got out of it, we went to the fucking moon with rockets, which this is Conspiracy Theory Thursday, so I get you, I hear you. The moon landing was fake. Fine. We'll do that's a conversation for another Thursday. But, assuming let's just assume that is what happened. It was directly because of Operation Paperclip that we found the scientist who made that happen. A lot of people would still say they don't fucking care. Werner von Braun was a bad dude. We'll dive a little bit into it, or maybe we don't. Maybe I didn't have the time. I didn't think I would have the time to dive into it. But it wasn't just him. 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians, and this is framing it as some of them were Nazi Party members. I believe the majority of them were Nazi Party members. It wasn't just Germans. It was a very large portion of them were SS or SA. So it didn't, they say right here, while the program was not explicitly focused on Nazis, it did involve individuals with connections to the Nazi regime, including those in the SS or SA. So being in the SS has a little bit more, again, the framing of this. It did involve individuals with connections, such as being in the SS. Look, if you're in the SS, you have little more than a connection, right? That's like being a fucking senator and being like, well, I'm loosely connected to the American government. Like, what the fuck are you talking about, bitch? You are the American government. The SS is the fucking Nazi, son. All right? Don't even give me this shit. What is this? AI, Google, what is your silliness here? With connections, like, they were SS. Some of them were SS. Like, no, they were the Nazis. They weren't connected to them. They were. So even that is a little bit silly, right? Just had to point that out, okay? That's but anyway, either way, I'm getting all worked up over it. Goose frobbing my shit. Let's go to this. All right. So, moving on, interview highlights on the origins of Operation Paperclip. In just a few months after the landings at Normandy, and you have Allied forces making their way across the continent, headed towards Berlin and Munich, and with them, sort of scattered among the soldiers, are these small teams of scientific intelligence officers, and they are searching for the Reich's weapons, and they don't know what they might find. One example was they had no idea that Hitler had created this whole arsenal of nerve agents. They had no idea that Hitler was working on a bubonic plague weapon. That is really where Paperclip began, which was suddenly the Pentagon realizing, wait a minute, we need these weapons for ourselves. And I'll be honest, I don't have too much issues with us taking the Nazis' technology. Like I said, I worked in recording studios. The tape machine and the condenser microphone were two very important. I mean, those two inventions in the hands of American musicians and recording engineers and producers defined some of the most important musical recordings of the 1970s and 60s and 80s and 90s. And I'm speaking into a fucking condenser microphone when I'm talking to you guys, so this revolutionized the music industry, having these, and there was more too, but those are the two big pieces of equipment that found their way into the music industry and were created by the Nazis. So I don't have too much of an issue with them taking Nazi equipment. But, taking Nazi scientists, and again, not all of them were bad guys, but a lot of them were. A lot of them weren't actual Nazis. Again, that's what AI says. So, okay, let's say AI is true on that. All right, then those guys specifically who weren't Nazis, they maybe weren't such bad guys. We don't know. But the ones who were, they were Nazis. They were SS. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, on the U.S. government's efforts to make the scientists passed. There began a propaganda campaign by the US government to whitewash the past of these scientists who very much knew were ardent Nazis. And it happened on a number of levels, from the bureaucrats and Army intelligence who were asked to sort of rewrite the dossiers on up to the generals in the Pentagon who flatly said we need these scientists, and we're going to have to rewrite some history. And that's where it becomes very tricky and very nefarious. You have to be a Nazi ideologue to move up that chain of command so high. Again, this is talking about like von Braun, right? It's almost like someone who is a hedge fund manager in the United States trying to take the line that they don't believe in capitalism, that they're just trying to earn a living for their family. I mean, if you're going to rise to the top of your field, you maintain the party line, and that is what I found was the case with Paperclip. So yeah, that's, to say, yeah, some of these dudes were genuinely horrible dudes, probably a lot of them. On Werner von Braun's Nazi past, he is a great example. Because you wonder where the deal with the devil really happened in terms of his whitewash past. Because the U.S. government, NASA in particular, was so complicit in keeping his past hidden. In doing the research, one discovers that not only was von Braun a Nazi, but a member of the SS. And not only was he running the underground slave labor facility, okay, so bad dude, where his rockets were being built. He wasn't running the facility, but he was in charge of the science there. But when they were running low of good technicians, Werner von Braun himself traveled nearby to the Buchenwald concentration camp, where he had handpicked slaves to work for him as laborers. When you see that kind of activity during the war, and you have to imagine what he saw and what he knew, it's impossible to excuse him from his Nazi past. On the fates of the Nazi scientists. They all had different trajectories, but none of them seemed to have been held accountable for what happened and what they were involved in during the war. Dr. Benzinger, who was one of the Nazi doctors, came here, and when he died at the age of 90-something, he had a wonderful obituary in the New York Times, lauding him for inventing the ear thermometer. Entirely left out of the story was the work that he performed on concentration camp prisoners. So that was the one I was talking about that performed on prisoners, Dr. Benzinger. Okay, so that's all included in the book Operation Paperclip. If you're interested, give that a run through. From everything I read review-wise, it's a pretty good book. I wanted to dive, so I don't like using Wikipedia as a source. That doesn't necessarily come from. I know in college, everybody is always told about, not to use it as a source. It is a good place to find sources on occasion. Sometimes I've gotten on Wikipedia and even the sources they use are complete and utter shit, because it isn't, experts that are adding these to the Wikipedia pages. A lot of times it's just normal people who are editing it and adding their own sources. And sometimes those sources end up being crap. Sometimes they end up being good. In this case, I wanted to focus on a very specific aspect of this. So that's what we're going to focus on. And the only place I could really find it that had condensed that information into a point where I only had a few paragraphs to read for you instead of having to scroll through 4 or 5 web pages just to highlight one paragraph here and paragraph there was Wikipedia. So what are you going to do? All right. So that is what it is. This is a Wikipedia page on Operation Paperclip. Gives us the rundown, the background, which we already kind of know. The Ausenberg list, we didn't really talk into that. But a brief rundown, the Ausenberg list was a list created by Werner Ausenberg, the engineer scientist heading the, I don't know how to say that word, the Defense Research Association, there we go, recorded the names of the politically cleared men to the Ausenberg list, thus retaining them to scientific work. The Ausenberg list was essentially a list of all the various scientists that were brought over. What they say, 1,600 Nazis, estimated, that were brought over to America. This is identification of some of these scientists, capture and detention of some of the scientists, which is interesting to read about, but we're not going to dive into that on this particular stream. We can do, if I get any comments on the YouTube channel or the stream that says, hey, do a live stream on Operation Paperclip, then we'll come back to it and go through it in much greater detail. This is the arrivals of the Nazis into America. Which is definitely some very interesting stuff, particularly because a lot of this happened in one, I believe it was in Alabama. Let's see, Fort Bliss, Texas, White Sands Proving Grounds, New Mexico, and there it is, Huntsville, Alabama. In 1949, the Chief of Ordnance of the United States Army designated Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, as the Ordnance Rocket Center, its facility for rocket research and development. In 1950, Fort Bliss Missile Development Operation, including von Braun and his team of over 130 paperclip members, was transferred to the Redstone Arsenal. So that was a big place. I did have a webpage that I chose not to include just because it was a little bit too much information. I knew I was going to run out of time. By the way, we're already 10 minutes over when I usually end the stream, but I did want to get through this with you guys. Huntsville, Alabama was a pretty big hotspot, and there was an interesting webpage that I found detailing some of the citizens of Huntsville, Alabama, when the Nazis first arrived, and they were suspicious about this. Kind of highlighting the conspiracy aspect of this, where people were concerned about these. People knew to some extent that this is happening or was happening or had happened years and decades into the future. People were aware of it, and it didn't come out. And where it's going to come out, I believe that's what we're going to read. We'll read about that in a second. But until it came out, there was people, especially in Huntsville, who were very suspicious of these new Germans who are being introduced into their society as scientists. Here's awards that some of these Nazi scientists were given. That's a very interesting section too. Again, we'll go over that in greater detail if I do an entire stream on it. Advancements that these people made: Werner von Braun, Adolf Bussmann. There's the V2 rocket and Apollo missions that were direct results of them. So there was a lot of things that these Nazi scientists did, in fact, create for America that did end up being of pretty great significance. This is what I wanted to look into, was controversy and investigation. So I'm going to read this bit for you, and then I'll probably let you guys go. So, before his official approval of the program, President Truman was indecisive about it for 16 months. Years later, in 1963, Truman recalled that he was not in the least reluctant to approve paperclip, that because of relations with the Soviet Union, this had to be done and was done. Several of the paperclip scientists were later investigated because of their links with the Nazi Party during the war. Only one paperclip scientist, George Rickey, was formally tried for any crime, and no paperclip scientist was found guilty of any crime in the United States or Germany. Rickey was returned to Germany in 1947 to stand at the Dora trial, where he was acquitted. In 1951, weeks after his U.S. arrival, the Boston Globe accused Walter Schreiber of being a party to human experiments conducted by Kurt Blom at Ravensbrück. He immigrated to Argentina with the aid of the U.S. military. This is a good point to put out there. U.S. paperclip brought Nazi scientists over, almost around 1,600 Nazi scientists over to America, but the U.S. military helped Nazi scientists settle all over South America as well. That is a component of it as well that we didn't read about. In 1984, Arthur Rudolph, under perceived threat of prosecution relating to his connection as operations director for V2 missile production to the use of forced labor from Miltenbau-Dora at the Milton Work, renounced his U.S. citizenship and moved to West Germany, which granted him citizenship. I believe the Middlework, got a little thing right there. Middlework was a World War II factory built underground. It used slave labor from the Miltenbau-Dora concentration camp. Right, so that's where this fellow worked. Von Braun was investigated in 1961 for his involvement in the Nazi Party as an SS member. The FBI concluded that he had joined the Nazi Party solely to advance his academic career and to avoid imprisonment. So there you have it, right? If you ever get caught doing something bad by the FBI, just say, it was for my career, and they'll understand. Or, well, really, you have to build a rocket for them first. But if you can do that, you can get away with anything. For 50 years, from 1963 to 2013, the Strughold Award, named after Hubertus Strughold, the father of space medicine, for his central role in developing innovations like the spacesuit and space life support systems, was the most prestigious award from the Space Medicine Association, a member organization of the Aerosmith Medical Association. On October 1st, 2013, in the aftermath of a Wall Street Journal article published on December 1st, 2012, which highlighted his connection to human experiments during World War II, the Space Medicine Association's executive committee announced that the Space Medicine Association Strughold Award had been retired. Well, that's quite a severe punishment, for, human experiments. You don't get an award named after you. So let that be a lesson to all you fucking Nazi doctors out there. In a 2014 book, Annie Jacobsen investigated 21 prominent scientists and technicians recruited by Paperclip and found that 15 were active party members. 10 served in paramilitary groups like the SS or the SA. 8 worked directly with major Nazi leaders, and 6 were tried at Nuremberg. So, Nuremberg trials, that's a whole other thing. Yeah, so that gives you a rundown of just kind of how we discovered that there was Nazis living here in America. It happened because so many media, let's see, we got the Boston Globe, we had the Wall Street Journal, we had the New York Times that threw an article out there, and then of course this journalist Annie Jacobsen, various journalists for various different media outlets put in the due diligence to learn that we did in fact have Nazis living in America, and they were learning this in 1947, 1951, 1984, 1963 to in 2013. 2012 was when the Wall Street Journal published its article on the Hubertus Strughold and when his award had been taken away from him. And then in 2014, Annie Jacobsen's book, where she investigated 21 scientists and technicians and found that 15 of them were in fact Nazi Party members, right? So much for the AI telling us that, well, only some of them were. But anyways, that's that book we looked at, by the way. It looked like it was a pretty interesting read. But yeah, so in long story short, various different scientists, we came about this information, and how we know it's true is because various scientists, inevitably, it came to light, their past histories came to light, and we as Americans realized that these people were in fact Nazi scientists, and these findings were heavily recorded in various different journalist outlets and in books that were written about them, and so long story short, there is way more information out there now that I found. Operation Paperclip, and how the specifically I'm blanking on the name, the Ossenberg list came out, how that was essentially spilt. There was some whistleblowers involved in various aspects of this that inevitably led to at least the first realization that there was Nazi scientists, but it always was considered a conspiracy theory. When I was young in the 2000s, it was at that point known that there was Nazi scientists, but they continued to find them well into the 2010s. They were finding out, oh, by the way, this guy who invented this was in fact a Nazi scientist. So it was a conspiracy theory that, even though we knew it was true, it continued to unveil for decades more and more information. People continue to be blown away decade after decade by how many famous scientists in America were in fact Nazi scientists. So that is Operation Paperclip. Now, we're going to go ahead and end the stream right there. I didn't get into any of my funnier, my funnier web pages that I had for you. I had a good one here, that this channel right here, Crypto Cipher, I think they're a new channel. God, this guy is fucking funny. And I was really hoping to play this video for you. This is about the church that threatened the U.S. government, Operation Snow White. Hint that Scientology. Scientology ran their own operation against the American government to spy on American government, government agencies, and did a pretty good fucking job too. It's pretty appalling, but really funny. This guy, whoever made this channel, Crypto Cipher, they only have 120 subscribers, and this video was just so fucking funny. I laughed my ass off. The animation was really good, and it was an enjoyable video. So if you have some time, watch it. We're going to watch this on a different stream. I'm going to do Conspiracy Theories That Were True Part 2, and we will go over this a little bit. Nope, not going to give you the skivvy on that particular one. And then we missed some of the sadder ones, which were mostly more human experiments. MIT, a spoonful of sugar helps the radioactive oatmeal down, when MIT and Quaker Oats paired to conduct experiments on unsuspecting young boys in a orphanage. So that was a thing that happened. MIT actually performed human experiments using radioactive oatmeal on orphans, young orphan boys, that's a pretty sad story. I'm kind of glad we didn't get to hit that. Of course, we have Oak Ridge, Tennessee experiments. And then, of course, you can't talk about Oak Ridge, the experimenting on orphans, experimenting on Navy people, without talking about the most infamous of human experiments conducted by the American government, the Tuskegee experiments, right? Pretty brutal thing to read about. All of those were pretty sad conspiracy theories that, the end result of which put a bit of a tear in your eye. So I'm kind of glad we didn't get over those this stream. We'll go over those first thing. Tuskegee experiment was the very next web page that I had for you guys, but we didn't hit it in enough time. I took, there were so many conspiracy theories that ended up being true that I really had to just pick out what I thought were, not necessarily my favorites, but the most important ones, right? The most well-known ones, I figured get them out of the way. I still had the heart attack gun on there and the mind-bending, CIA's mind-bending practices, and Bohemian Grove were still things I didn't even get to collect web pages on. So we'll save all of that for later when we do the next Conspiracy Theories That Were True #2 stream. Is when we'll cover all of that. So, but for now, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go for the night. If you watch this live, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the stream. I think I successfully blocked every burp this stream too. So if my mom's watching, I'm doing better on that. All right. But if you watched, I really appreciate you doing so. Please leave a like and follow on the stream if you enjoy this kind of content. Conspiracy Theories, we do it every Thursday. If you are watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy the content as well. And maybe consider checking me out over on Twitch. The general idea of me doing this as a Twitch channel instead of a YouTube channel was I was hoping to eventually get some people into the chat room to talk with me about these sort of things. All of this research is fun and I enjoy doing it, but it's a much funner when I get to hear other people's opinions on it and have conversations with them about it. Yeah. So, if you decide like you would like to come over and have a conversation about all this stuff, please do. I would enjoy having you over on Twitch. But if not, I still appreciate you watching it on YouTube. If you like conspiracy theories, check me out every Thursday at 7 p.m. I think that's actually changing next month. Next month, it's going to be 11 a.m. is when I'm going to start streaming, because I'm going to try a different time, see if I get any more follows on that time. So next Thursday, I got my other set of note cards. Next Thursday, I will be streaming about conspiracy theories at 11 a.m. And if you are interested, that will be next week's conspiracy theory will be Nicolas Cage is a vampire. That's conspiracy theory. So we're going to go over the data and we're going to see, is he really a vampire or not? We're going to look into it. So if that sounds fun, please join me next Thursday for another Conspiracy Theory Thursday. And I will also be streaming tomorrow at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. If you are interested in film, movies, you like that kind of thing, tomorrow I'll be doing a stream on the elements of storytelling. So if you're a writer, if you enjoy storytelling, if you enjoy writing, if you enjoy narration in movies, you just want to learn a little bit about the elements of what makes a good story, I'm going to dive into that. I have a whole bunch of personal research that I'm bringing up for that particular episode. So, please, if that sounds fun, please join me at 7 p.m. tomorrow, or check out the video on my YouTube. It'll be up Saturday. It'll be on my YouTube and you can look at it there. Anyways, in the meantime, thank you to everybody who watches this. I really appreciate your support. Hope you had a wonderful Easter weekend and I will see you tomorrow. Peace.